Welcome back to the Communication Mastery podcast with me, Mark Burlinson. This is where we unleash the power of understanding to build bridges and not boxes, because we understand that communication is the oxygen of teamwork. We all need communication to thrive in life and work. And in this podcast, we want to increase your communication mastery so that we can all learn to adapt to one another and be effective in our communication. So thanks for being here. Let's learn together. And this week, we want to look at a topic that's very important for most of us in business, and that is the whole area of miscommunication. Because miscommunication takes up so much time, sucks so much energy out of our teamwork. And so I've got some points for you on the battle of misunderstanding, where we can look at the reasons we misunderstand each other, the reasons we miss each other when we're trying to get through or we're trying to get something done. Why do we not connect? Why do we not make those deeper connections that we need? Because it's a battle that we all fight, isn't it? And here's what I want you to catch. Misunderstanding is rooted in a lack of skills in the science of communication. So we can train ourselves to reduce misunderstanding. When I train myself to recognize the different communication styles that people prefer, and then the unique characteristics, the unique needs of those styles, and then the distress patterns that come up when one of those styles is not in a happy place, when one of those styles is struggling, I can recognize the distress and learn to adapt. I'm equipping myself to understand others more fully and therefore to reduce misunderstanding. And so most misunderstanding is not the result of ill will. It's more a result of ignorance. And so I want to help you learn some different keys today of how to reduce misunderstanding. 6 keys we're going to look at, different things you can do, rooted in the reasons why we misunderstand each other. And every great marriage is built on connection. Can you imagine what it would be like if you had a marriage where every conversation brings you closer together rather than further apart? A marriage where what you say is actually understood and not misrepresented. It is possible to have a marriage like that. And if you'd like that, I invite you to go to my website and click on Communication IQ for Couples. Let's make a start today on your marriage embracing communication mastery. And number 1 would be a lack of clarity. When there's vague language in our communication, there's jargon, or maybe our instructions as a team leader are unclear, then that can lead to confusion about expectations, or it can lead to misunderstandings about the responsibilities of different team members, or it can lead to a lack of clarity on the next steps we want to take. And so most of us resort to vague language when we're unsure, when we're unclear ourselves. For example, you might say, I need this done as soon as possible, rather than specifying when I need it done. And so the key for the lack of clarity to reduce misunderstanding is to be specific, but also to use plain language. Most of us hedge our words because we're hesitant to confront somebody or to come across as too demanding. A few of us recognize that we come across too easily as too demanding, and we need to be careful with that. But for the majority of folks, we kind of ease off what we're trying to say, and that results in a lack of clarity. So be specific and use plain language. That will solve that number 1 problem of a lack of clarity that leads to misunderstanding. Second area that we need to focus on as we're reducing misunderstanding is to beware of assumptions and unspoken expectations. This kind of leads on from what we just said about a lack of clarity, doesn't it? But people often assume that others know what they mean, or that others share their priorities, or understand the tasks that are needed, or understand the context that we're operating within, without it being clearly stated. And so then there's also a wide open door for misunderstanding. For example, I was talking to a salesperson the other week who said that they just assumed that a teammate knew that the client was promised something in a separate meeting that they weren't part of. They assumed the teammate had been filled in on that, and that led to all kinds of trouble because the teammate didn't know, and they made a mistake in the way they handled the client. It caused them all kinds of difficulties. So assumptions or unspoken expectations can really be another tripwire in our communication. So here's the key for this one: say it clearly, even if it seems obvious. Stating the obvious is always helpful to avoid misunderstanding, even if it feels like it's redundant to you. The third area that causes misunderstanding is actually on the other end of the communication. It's poor listening, because misunderstanding often happens not because something was poorly said, but because it wasn't really heard right. There needs to be active listening. Uh, I'm thinking of an example where I actually did this myself. I was multitasking in a meeting. I was checking something on my calendar while someone else was talking, and I completely missed what it was they were saying. I misunderstood completely, and we had to go back around. We took another 5 or 10 minutes to undo the mistake that I had made in not listening carefully enough. I should have been asking clarifying questions rather than checking my calendar for something completely different. I'd got distracted, I was multitasking, and that really caused the misunderstanding. It was my fault. I had to apologize for that. So, listening actively, asking clarifying questions help the listening to be tuned in to what's being communicated. So, what I'm hearing is this, or my assumption from what you're saying is that we're going to do this together. Those kinds of things. Active listening that reflects what I've heard causes us to make sure that there's clarity rather than misunderstanding. American business wastes billions of dollars every year on miscommunication. If you're ready to change that trend, invest in communication IQ today, because it will give you a great return in terms of employee alignment, retention, customer engagement, profitability, sales outcomes. All of those areas will grow as you understand the science of communication. So go to my website at markburlinson.com, click on the business button, and let's have an introductory chat today about how I can help your business be more productive by enhancing communication. A fourth area that can really be a minefield for misunderstanding is when there are differences between the folks who are communicating, whether it's a communication style difference. We all have different communication languages that we prefer. And each of those communication languages interprets tone or phrasing or even silence in a different way. And so that can lead to a misinterpretation in our conversation. But also, on top of that, different cultures have different styles and different ways of addressing issues or confronting problems or seeking solutions. You obviously are aware that I'm originally from the UK, and our culture in the UK is very different from the culture here in the United States. And so that can be a fertile ground for misunderstanding sometimes. For example, direct feedback might seem rude to some or refreshingly clear to others. Whichever it is, you need to understand the culture that you're speaking into in order to avoid misunderstanding. And so be sensitive to diversity, be sensitive to culture, and educate yourself as much as you can on those 7 different communication languages in the communication IQ framework, because all of those steps will enable you to navigate differences and bring them into the strengthening of understanding rather than the cause of misunderstanding. 2 more to mention. The fifth one would be the emotional tone of a conversation or an interaction, because messages, especially written ones, can really be misunderstood very easily. Whether it's an email or it's a text or maybe it's a Slack post, it can lack tone, and it certainly lacks body language because you're not present with the person as you're giving that communication. So it can be very easy to misread maybe a text that says something in a very brief way that may seem perfectly normal to you, or it may seem perfectly clear to you, but the person on the other end may receive it completely differently, either as a command when it was a suggestion, or maybe a criticism when it was an encouragement. That can be misread. And when we misread someone's intent, then misunderstanding comes in very quickly. A short response can seem very curt or annoyed when really it was just intended to be efficient. And we want to avoid those misunderstandings as well if we can. So be aware of emotional tone, especially if it's not an in-person communication, but it's something more in writing. So add context or add warmth if you feel like the tone might be lost when you've written something down and hit send. And then the final area that causes misunderstanding is the whole area of overload. I mentioned multitasking in a meeting where I'd made that mistake, but even if there's too much communication and there's information overload, that can cause misunderstanding. One of the key things I've seen in team meetings is where you kind of bury the key points in a sea of information, and that can lead to the important messages getting lost in the general the general stuff of a whole flood of information. If you're sending an informational email to folks and then there are action points, make sure you pull out those action items. Don't bury them in the conversation, but pull them out as bullet points somewhere in that email, because that will enable people to see the takeaway from the rest of the content. So highlight action steps and highlight key takeaways, whether it's voice to voice, face to face, or whether it's in some form of written communication. Take time to pull out what needs to be grasped clearly to make it clear and avoid misunderstandings. I put together an infographic that you can download from the show notes just about catching misunderstanding in some of those 6 different ways. It's easier to print it out, have it close by you, maybe at your desk or for the next meeting, so that you can make sure you don't cause misunderstanding inadvertently. Remember, I said most misunderstanding comes from ignorance rather than ill will. And I'm on a mission to reduce misunderstanding as much as possible. So download that infographic from the show notes and then text me a response. There's a text link in the show notes as well. Text me a response and tell me how this has helped you, or when your last misunderstanding, what caused it, or is there something more that we haven't mentioned today that you saw in your last misunderstanding that you could have learned from and you'd like others to learn from too. So I'm looking forward to those texts, and please recommend this episode to a friend or someone who came to mind as we were talking about some of those issues. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It would mean a lot to me if you'd rate and review the podcast so it helps more listeners to find us. But also, would you give me your feedback on things you'd like to hear about in future episodes? And remember to share the episode with a friend if you see something that would benefit them as well. You can reach me with feedback through my website at markburlinson.com. Just click on the contact button and send me a message. I respond to everyone personally, and I really want to hear from you. So thank you again for listening, sharing, reviewing, and giving me your feedback.